Hey, great. Welcome, everybody. I'm get my first slide up here a second. Um, while the slide's coming up, I could go with the absolute shortest version of a summary. John comes home, reconciles with his father, dumps Maria, dumps Julia, marries Hester, has a baby, and then it all goes wrong. So that's sort of your really fast version of what happens, but there's so much more going on. Um, if we have it, the first slide there. So the picture here, the illustration is by Francis Mosley, and that is they assume to be Puritan Grange, and I think you can see how stark it is in appearance, which fits in with Puritan Grange. So um, that gives you an idea of what Puritan Grange looks like as we start into these chapters. Second slide. In the second slide, just a couple things I'd like you to think about as we go through. William Blackwood, who publishes Blackwood's magazine, where this story appeared, was very critical of John Caldigate. He called him the involuntary Don Giovanni, too cold and too self-satisfied. And he actually asked Trollope to make changes in his character, that he thought he was too unsympathetic. And Trollope had some very nice conversations back and forth with him, basically saying that he didn't really think his characters could change once he had them going. Um, the second quote here is Mrs. Bolton is Trollope's best portrait of a religious fanatic. And this is from the Penguin Companion. There'll be more about that as we move along. And the last part was also from the Penguin Companion. To Trollope, the Christian religion was a religion offered comfort in a period when many still emphasized God's judgment. And I think it's interesting you go through this section, sort of are Trollope's views coming through, or is it mostly Mrs. Bolton's views of religion that are coming through? Okay, next slide. In chapters 14 through 17 takes John around to a lot of different places that he needs to visit to sort out his life. So in the first one, at home, he returns home and is ready to pursue his dream of marrying Hester Bolton. It's interesting to me that he spent the least amount of time with Hester compared to all the other women in his life. I mean, he met her for like one moment and touched her fingers, and this is his life's dream. The father and son reunion goes well. John allows that he'd like to farm and remain at Folking. He, quote, man can farm 5,000 acres as well as 50, end quote. He is asked to Pollington to tell the Shands about poor Dick. Aunt Polly writes to invite him to Babington. In his conversation about that with his father, he talks about the uncle at Babington being a fool. And I'd love the quote here: people who read no books are always fools to those who read. His father disagrees with that, saying he knows people who don't read who are not fools that know their business well. He also goes to Puritan Grange briefly to see Mrs. Bolton and Hester. Mrs. Bolton is ill. Hester meets him on his way to see her, and they talk very briefly. But she is every bit as beautiful as he remembers her. It's also interesting to think, too, he met her when she was like 15, and now she's 20. Um, he runs into Mr. Bolton on the way out, and it's a very cold reception from Mr. Bolton. So that is the end of that chapter. He next goes off to Pollington, and now his job is to unload these various women who think they're engaged to him. John is well received by the Shands and tells them all about Dick. He meets with Dr. Shand and offers him 500 pounds if he thinks it would help Dick to remedy his problems. But Dr. Shand thinks that's just money that could be spent on more alcohol and dissolution. Poor Mrs. Shand thinks making lots of shirts will help him. They really want to know what could help him. And John says really it's company, because now he's all alone as a sheep herder and lives a pretty solitary life, which is kind of sad. John now has an awkward conversation with Maria where he needs to break up with her. Now, once again, I feel like he's one of Trollope's characters that is terrible with women. He brings up the book he's got, and he's got it right in his jacket next to his heart. And what's she supposed to think when he pulls out this book and makes it seem like he's carried it next to his heart the entire time he's been gone? It's very awkward, and he really, comes across as a dope. And then there's all these quotes all about him. The next quote that's on the slide here, with him being like the moth to the flame. He was painfully near the blaze, determined not to be burned, and yet with no power of flying away from the candle into the farthest corner of the room. He does finally tell Mrs. Shand that they will not be married, and he beats a hasty retreat the next morning and gets out of there. So his next step, of course, is to go off to Babington. Now, this will be much more difficult because it's been 4 years since the scene in the closet where there was a proposal that John had neither accepted nor refused. So this will be a tougher escape. He makes excuses about needing to return to Australia, but Aunt Polly makes it clear, as the next quote says, he must be bound up with chains. She is not letting this guy go. He and Julia are thrown together at every occasion, including archery matches. I love the term the toxopholite. I taught archery for years and I'd never heard of toxopholite. I would have loved to have used that in class. John finally squares off with Aunt Polly and says he will not marry Julia. Mr. Babington, through all this, is oblivious and wonders why he and Aunt Polly aren't getting along. But John once again escapes and heads himself home. So now when he gets back home, he analyzes his situation with Hester, and he also talks to his father about it. And Mr. Caldigate is pretty surprised that Hester is who he wants to marry. And I love the quote at the bottom as he says to her, "Have you ever seen her?" And he said, "Yes, I've seen her twice." So that's recommendation enough to marry somebody. Unfortunately, he also mentions that Mrs. Bolton sees Mr. Caldigate as a pagan, which is probably not going to be a good start to their having a relationship. So John works up his courage and goes to Chesterton, to Puritan Grange, and tells Mrs. Bolton his plans for Hester, and she is shocked to say the least. And this chapter sort of segues into the next one, Robert Bolton, where he now he asks her to tell her husband about this, and she says, quote, "As I should almost any other most wild proposition that be made to me," unquote. She then proceeds to tirade about John, citing two of Aesop's fables that I looked up, where she talks about the doves and the kite and the lamb and the wolf. And I read both of these tales. They set John up as someone who will devour her daughter and ruin her life. She also sees him as, quote, "a sinner unregenerated and a wild man," end quote. So while she's thinking about all this, Robert Bolton arrives on the scene looking for Hester, who his mother says right away is engaged. She's engaged. She can't see him. She's very adamant about that. Now, Robert handles all of his father's affairs and is not well liked by Mrs. Bolton. Mrs. Robert, I love how they call them by their husband's name, Mrs. Robert, Margaret, his wife, attends and has given dinner parties and actually has been to a ball. The horror. It's unbelievable that she could be like this. And so they don't get along at all. John enlists Robert to plead his cause and will talk to Mr. Bolton. He does believe, Robert Bolton does believe that Hester has a right to be married and get away from her mother. So she knows that this is a problem for her. If we go to the next slide, chapter 19 comes up here. Now the tug of war for Hester in chapters 19 to 22. Men are so wicked. And now we're going to learn a lot more about how Mrs. Bolton really feels about things. So in this chapter and those to follow, Trollope, quote, explores the theme of religious suppression of worldly, especially sexual pleasures. Low church people are again the culprits. The fanatical mother, half mad in her religious rigor and jealousy of her daughter's love, is one of Trollope's most frightening characters, end quote. This is from Hall's biography of Trollope. The world is seen as sorrow and sin and seems to miss out on all the positive aspects of forgiveness and redemption. Mr. and Mrs. Bolton discuss Hester getting married, and it all revolves around all men being sinners. But Mr. Bolton tries to point out that aren't women sinners too, and isn't marriage something that, all girls should aspire to? But Mrs. Bolton is not buying this. When Mr. Bolton asked Mrs. Bolton, and I love this quote, if she would make a nun of Hester, she screams, "A nun? I would sooner sit by her bedside and watch her die." She's obviously not fond of Catholics. There's several references to that and papist things. She thinks nuns are very suspect. But, she doesn't want her to leave the house either. Hester finally gets to go to dinner with her relatives, and there's the oldest, Mr. Nicholas, and his wife, Mrs. Nicholas. Mrs. Nicholas is very religious, much like Mrs. Bolton, but they don't get along because she objected to the marriage of Mrs. Bolton to Mr. Bolton when it occurred. Then there's Mr. Daniel and his wife, Mrs. Daniel, who are also strict, but not quite as strict. Mr. Robert and his wife, who are obviously the dinner party people, and then Mr. William and his wife, who are also, they live in London, and they also live a more worldly life. And Hester gets to join this group of people for dinner, and then the men and women are separated, and the men discuss whether Hester should be able to meet John. And it is finally decided, as a result of that much persuasion to Mr. Bolton by Mr. Robert and the other brothers, that Hester could meet John at Robert's house. And then we go to chapter 20, Hester's Courage. Now on the slide here, you can see this is a Frances Mosley picture of Hester. You can see how lovely she is. And here we're going to find out about Hester's courage and her ability to stand up for her love. But I did think it was fascinating that chapter 19 ended with they agreed they could meet at Robert's house, and chapter 20 starts with they're engaged. It didn't take long. After they're engaged, all the world tries to pick holes in John's fitness as a husband. They bring up all his previous women, Maria and Julia. And of course, the Babingtons jump in on this with Julia and how he's ruined her life. They also find out about Mrs. Smith and what's going on with her, his gambling debts from Mr. Davis, his giving up the entail, his going to Australia. All of these things are brought up by everybody. And the brothers and Mrs. Bolton and Mr. Bolton, everybody's weighing in on all these various ideas. But Hester is determined. She is firm in her love for him, and she is not going to go away from that. And while they're talking about all these things, of course, a quote from John I liked is, there are so many lies going about that I almost feel myself to be famous. And so Hester sticks with it. And by the end of this chapter, a date is set for the wedding. Now, the next is the wedding, which is probably the saddest wedding I've ever read about in a story. I can hardly believe how sad this wedding day is. John's father doesn't come because he doesn't feel like he fits in at these kind of occasions, but he loves Hester and he's given Hester some lovely gifts. Mrs. Bolton, after much persuasion, agrees to come to the church, sits in the back, all in black, just praying for Hester, but is not going to come to the breakfast. And when he's trying to talk her into, Mr. Bolton, into why she can't come to the breakfast, he goes on to say in this quote here, she evaded him as she always did on such occasions, either by a real or simulated deficiency of consequent intelligence. And I just love that because Mr. Bolton, she keeps throwing all these crazy arguments at him and he's having such a hard time trying to talk her out of them. The wedding takes place and then they go to the breakfast. And after the breakfast, they decide Hester has asked John if she can go be with her mother alone, and then we'll come back in the carriage and he will get in and she won't see anybody else after that, and they'll head off on their honeymoon. Well, this obviously was a big mistake because Hester ends up begging and crying, with her mother over John, and that, she's not going to accept him, even if they're married. It doesn't matter that she's happy. Mrs. Bolton is not going to budge about this, and she's done with Hester and is not going to see her. And unfortunately for Hester, this is how she returns to go off on her honeymoon and get in the carriage. Chapter 22, as to touching pitch, there is so much talk in these next several chapters about touching pitch. Everybody from Mrs. Nicholas, Mrs. Bolton, everybody's worried about touching pitch. I looked a little bit at that. Pitch obviously being like tar is something that once it sticks to you, it never comes off, and it's going to ruin you. So John and Hester at the start of this chapter have returned from their long trip to Europe. Hester is pregnant, so they've decided to come home to have the baby. Hester goes to see her mother and reunites with her. But of course, once again, she will not have John in her home. She will not touch pitch and be defiled. That's just going to ruin her. The other interesting thing that she keeps talking about is John is a goat, referencing the Bible from Matthew's 25, verses 31 to 46. And just an abbreviated version. I'm not a huge churchgoer, so I had to look up. I wasn't as familiar with this about the sheep and the goats. But in a quoted version, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. And so obviously she feels John is the goat and he is headed to hell in a big hurry. And her big worry, of course, is that Hester will be dragged down with him because once again, she will have been touched by pitch. Next slide. In the next set of chapters, we now have the new heir, and the chapter 23, the new heir, is a little more upbeat from everything that's been going on. Things really certainly are going great for John. He has a baby boy, which is wonderful. He's attending church regularly, and he's going twice on Sunday. He's been forgiven by the Babingtons. Okay, and now Trollope brings in a little bit of humor here, where Mrs. Bolton allows to tell him that Julia will marry Augustus Smirkey from Plumcombe Pippins, and this is a far superior match for her daughter than John. And in the letter she writes, in the first quote on this page, We all like Mr. Smirky very much indeed and think that Julia has been most fortunate in her choice in the letter from Aunt Polly. And she actually underlines that Julia has been most fortunate in her choice. And she really wants to make it clear to John that Julia came out much better because when she was picking holes and being still annoyed about Julia, she felt that the Boltons came from very low stock and were not from the aristocracy. And Mr. Smirky's family has been there for a very long time. They may not have any land or money, but they've been around for a long time. And so Mr. Smirky is much better for her. But at least they have reconciled, and now bygones be bygones. And although John wasn't going to reconcile with her right away, he does agree. And of course, Hester says she would love to meet her and see them all. And she's happy that they're not going to, have this happen. And at the end of that chapter, Mrs. Bolton is being pressured to allow John to visit Puritan Grange because everybody's been hearing about all the great things he's been doing. He's doing very well running the estate, and he's going to church, and everything seems to be great. He's got money. The 60,000 pounds is in the bank. So everything looks great. Unfortunately, comes chapter 24, news from the gold mines. And now there is trouble in paradise. Cricket has written to him, and this has been written before the birth of the child, but he sort of held back on a lot of this information, waiting for his son to be born and not, wanting to get entangled. But Cricket wants money back as the gold mine, Polyuka, is failing. And John has no intention of giving back a dime. He's asked for money back because now the mine's not producing any money and they want money to be able to go start a new venture. And he is not going to give them a cent. Next comes a letter, and this was the shocker for me, from Euphemia Caldigate. What? And the essence of the letter, of course, was pay up or I will destroy you. And here the quote, second quote of this page: in spite of all your treachery to me, I do not wish to ruin you or to destroy your young wife by proving myself in England to have been married to you at Ahalala. What? This was fascinating to me that Trollope left us off with him going to see Euphemia in Sydney. She was dancing on the stage. We didn't hear anything more about it. And now she writes this lengthy letter saying how they were married. There was a minister. Everybody knows they were married. She can prove they were married. She's got a marriage certificate. This is a huge turn in the plot because just when he's about to be able to meet Mrs. Bolton, and of course for the family, Robert, this is especially a knife in the back because he's the one who encouraged all of this. And now what if this is true and everything is going wrong? So John immediately goes to see Robert, shares with him the letter, tells him everything that he believes that happens, that yes, he did sort of say he was engaged to her. Yes, they were sort of together, but no, they weren't married. And Robert is furious because he believes that he's really, been led astray through all of this. And the fact that he was with this woman, but he swears they were not married. So the next thing happens is chapter 25, we're called the baby sponsors, where they're working on trying to get people to be godparents for the christening. And they're waiting on Australia for word as the christening approaches, because they've written back to both Euphemia and Cricket and saying, no money, no way, we're not doing anything. So Hester, of course, wants to know what's up between Robert and John tells her all. And her response is a lengthy sort of response, but the part of it I put there: not doubt of you. I will never doubt you, says Hester. And she is going to stand by him no matter what. He tells her pretty much everything. He doesn't tell her quite about the marriage part, but he tells her all about their relationship. And she's upset because she would like Robert to be the godfather of the child. And he agrees that he'll go try to find out, but he doesn't think Robert will. And maybe Mr. William would be better off, or Mr. Nicholas or Mr. Daniel, one of the others, could be the godfather. In the meantime, Mrs. Bolton has agreed to be godmother to the child. They have asked her to be the child's godmother, but she still hates John and has not reconciled with him. So in chapter 26, now a stranger in Cambridge, John goes to meet with Robert to talk to him about the christening. And I love this quote from him saying, days are days with me, my boy. I can't afford to give up a morning for every baby that is born, which is hysterical because he makes it sound like, babies every minute are asking him to be their godfather, and it's not his sister's child he's talking about. So, of course, John presses him. He said, look, I'm not happy with you. I don't like the way this is going. I have to stand up for my sister. If things go wrong, I'm definitely going to stand up for my sister. Um, and of course, now John's all annoyed about that thinks he has no right to be angry with him. But after talking about it, he agrees that they'll get somebody else to do the christening, and he leaves and decides he's going to walk around town and get ready to go visit Mrs. Bolton at Puritan Grange. But with the letter from Euphemia and everything that's happening, he's not sure it's a good idea to go see Mrs. Bolton, because if she asks him questions about things, what'll happen? So as he wanders around Cambridge, he suddenly wanders through the park and sees this old man leaning on a cane and looks at him and thinks he knows him. And lo and behold, of course, it's Cricket. And Cricket is there in Cambridge. And John does not acknowledge that he sees that. I mean, he knows it's Cricket, but doesn't acknowledge Cricket. And Cricket, we believe, knows that it's him, and they don't acknowledge each other. And I think very smart on John's part, he decides not to engage because he should be thinking about what's going to happen. And so he hustles his way back to Robert to see him, to ask if he will represent him. And here we have a very interesting conversation to finish off this section, where Robert allows us, he's not going to represent John because he has to represent Hester. And John feels that Hester and John are one, and you represent us both. And Robert does not think that's the case. Robert thinks Hester is going to need her own representation when all this happens. And he will not agree to represent John right off the bat. And he says, look, let's wait till after the christening. That's taking place now. Let's wait till Wednesday. And then I want an answer by Wednesday whether or not you will represent me. So John, with Cricket in town, knows he's going to need a lawyer. There's going to be trouble. And unfortunately, I feel like the poor christening is going to go the way of the wedding, where things are not going to be happy. So last slide there, questions for us to think about for discussion as we head into it. So first of all, the people's thoughts about all the religious references in this section. So much talk about the fatted calf, the prodigal son coming back, flesh and the devil, touching pitch, serving God and mammon. There's so many religious references here. Is Mrs. Bolton committed to her religious beliefs, or is she just a sore loser that John was able to marry Hester over her objections? And our narrator talks a little bit about that as well. I'd be curious as to what people think, whether she is as firm in her religious beliefs, or she got bested by John and that's her main problem. What is Euphemia Smith's endgame, money or John? Why did Trollope leave us thinking that they had parted without getting involved? Is Hester's reaction to John's version of events realistic? She's certainly going to stand by her man no matter what. She needs Tammy Wynette or whatever right behind her. She's right with this guy. Is that realistic? And I just threw in, this was really for a joke going through it, but are there any men who are not steeped in sin over their heads? They certainly seem to think, Mrs. Bolton thinks there are none. So in case anybody runs out of things to talk about, we could mention whether we know of any men who are not steeped in sin over their heads. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed these chapters. It was very exciting with the turn of events during them.